Our immune system is like an army, and a cut like a battlefield.
And today we'll be talking about the front line of the battlefield, the macrophage.
They work in unison with many other types of cells, such as T cells, B cells, and dendritic cells.
And just as Marines would work in unison with the radar, weapons manufacturing, and the Army.
Whoa, slow down though. Let's start with macrophages. When bacteria attacks the body, the macrophages are the first ones there.
Just like the Marines are the first in line to attack.
Their preferred method of attack is that each macrophage likes to take up to 100 enemy cells, absorb them into their cell membrane, and essentially digest them to death.
Similar to the Marines' Trojan attack.
The macrophages are so strong that in cases of small cuts and scrapes, they can usually do the entire assault on their own.
But if they don't, they call them the heavy troops.
They send messenger proteins, like the military would send radars, and contact what are called neutrophiles.
And this would be the Air Force sending their fighter jets and bombers to annihilate the enemy.
This is because when the neutrophiles come in, they do a great job of killing enemy bacteria, but they also kill friendly cells in the process. They're basically just massive killers.
Just as the pilot would stay danger close, there's always the risk of friendly
Macrophages
fire.
can then send more messengers in order to contact the dendritic cells, which will then go to the front line and sample for an enemy substance.
And personnel not fitted for active duty on the front line will sample enemy tactics and weapons.
Following this, the dendritic cells head back to the lymph node in order to contact the T and B cells.
And these researchers will go back to headquarters to develop better fighting tactics and weapons.
In the lymph node, with this newly acquired genetic information, the T and B cells can then suit up for battle, essentially. They multiply and create a large force that is ready to specialize and eradicate the enemy.
And when these new tactics and weapons are found, they are distributed to the front line to support the...
After the battle is won, the remaining cells simply die off because they don't want to waste the energy of the body if they're not actually doing anything anymore because they're not fighting anymore. However, there are some cells that are left over, the T and B cells that were outfitted earlier but stayed in the lymph node. These keep the genetic information of the enemy so that you can have frontline soldiers able to attack these enemies, and they'll be specialized if this enemy ever attacks you again. These cells are called the memory cells, or more specifically, memory T and B cells.
And with the enemy defeated, the friendly forces will always remember the enemy strategies on the battlefield.
But now we'll move back into specifically the macrophage, but more importantly, the smaller parts of the macrophage that allow it to work in the specialized way that it does.
The macrophage is the biggest cell to fight off any foreign invaders. It absorbs any viruses or bacteria into it and uses any enzymes created by the lysosome to break it down, or break down the viruses and bacteria. Now, the lysosome can be seen as the provider of the fluid to a stomach that the macrophage has, as it creates these enzymes to not only break down viruses and bacteria, but break down any dead cells or waste in the body. And such as a Marine has their gun to kill and their hands to clean, the lysosome creates these fluids for the stomach of the macrophage to, kill viruses and bacteria and clean the body of dead cells and waste.
The cell membrane, another organelle of the macrophage, is located on the outside of the cell. The cell membrane in the case of the macrophage is used as a place where it can suck in enemy forces and be essentially a place where they are used to digest the enemy forces. Essentially, the macrophage uses this as a weapon, but it also uses it as an armor, because the cell membrane acts as something of a gatekeeper from the cell, essentially putting a wall between intracellular or inside the cell and extracellular or outside of the cell. There are some things that can simply permeate the cell membrane, such as oxygen, water, alcohol, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, but most things need to be brought in by special proteins that guide them in. And in the case of the macrophage, these proteins would essentially grab onto bacteria and almost force them back into the macrophage, and then they would digest and kill it. So in this sense, it's not really comparable to any specific modern-day weapon. It acts as more of a weapon and an armor, and it is a very effective way of killing that the macrophage uses.
The nucleus is the headquarters of the cell, and it has these strong, formidable walls that keep the smallest of molecules from being able to permeate through it. And these walls are similar to the walls around the cell membrane, which are a phospholipid bilayer. And the DNA, or the nucleus, also contains a neuroskeleton, which gives the cell the support it needs to move around. It also contains the genetic material DNA, which keeps the cell from becoming insane and keep it from mutating as well.
The mitochondria, another organelle, are essentially the power plant of the cell. They are used to take high energy molecules, and they convert these high energy molecules into ATP, which is energy that can be used by the cell in its various tasks, such as in the case of the macrophage, digesting, or things so simple as just movement by the cell. Essentially, if you wanted to look at the macrophage as the tank of cells, this would essentially be comparable, and correctly comparable, to the engine of the tank. It takes these high energy molecules such as glucose and converts them into this usable ATP. But the macrophage does not have an extremely significant amount of mitochondria in comparison to the liver cell, which has a lot more. They are still very vital in playing a role for the macrophage in that they do still make energy, just as the tank's engine would take the chemical energy of the oil and convert it into the kinetic energy that the tank would actually be able to use.
Now, the Golgi body creates specialized weaponry for the front line, and it manages and modifies existing enzymes to fix or create a new one for a new situation. It also creates lysosomes and is a key for transporting lipids throughout the body. It takes molecules shipped from the endoplasmic reticulum and puts them through the multiple cisternine layers found in the Golgi body. Once it is done going through these multiple cisternine layers, it is then a vesicle is then formed and created to ship this new modified enzyme or molecule due to the purpose that it was created.
Now you can see that sometimes war is necessary, especially when it's for the greater good.
In this case, it's you. And to think some people say that war isn't part of human nature.